I believe we have a full contingent, and with that, then I will call this meeting for the Local Agency Formation Commission for September 21st, 2016 to order. And if you'd please rise and join me in a salute to our flag. Hand over your heart, ready to begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So with that, Madam Clerk, would you please take the roll?
Commissioner Cunningham?
Here.
Commissioner Dandy?
Here.
Commissioner Freeman?
Here.
Commissioner Parks?
Here.
Commissioner Zaragoza?
Here.
Chair Morehouse?
Here.
Alternate Commissioner Ramirez?
Here.
Alternate Commissioner Rooney?
Here.
Alternate Commissioner Ross?
Here.
Very good. With that, we'll move to our agenda review to consider and approve the following changes in the order of business. We intend to hear closed session item 21 prior to hearing item 20. There's a relationship. Okay. I have a question out of alternate Commissioner Rooney.
So in the event that the alternate commissioners are not going to be in closed session, which it makes a determination on that.
Correct.
If that is the case, I would request that we move the executive officer report and the informational items to prior to closed session.
Informational, I'm going to check the order. I thought we were going to do that anyway, but no.
It follows 21.
Oh, part of 21. Well,
I mean, in the event that we were not included in closed session.
okay.
Yeah. We have other
Fair
things
enough.
to do.
Okay. Yes, we shall do that then in the event of whatever happens. Okay.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch the mover and seconder.
The seconder was Dandy, yes. So, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? All right, that. Okay, with that, we will move to our public comments. And I do have 3 speaker cards that are not related to anything on our current agenda, and then I have one later, item 8. So with that, let me begin with, I guess, Mr. Vanoni, Charles Vanoni, if you'd like to speak to us first.
Good morning.
Morning.
Okay, we are here to ask you to take the points I'm going to make into consideration when you study the City of Ventura's application to annex the North Bank Vanoni property. This project has been approved by a unanimous vote of the Design Review Committee, the Planning Commission, and the Ventura City Council. My father purchased the property in 1954 when the city's general plan in 2005 and the Satiquoi Wells Community Plan in 2009 were approved. They stated that when this property was annexed to the city, its best use would be residential housing. The word "when" told us that it was just a matter of time and the city intended to use the land, and that development was, in the city's eyes, desirable and inevitable. Still, we continued to farm while all the other farmland that once neighbored ours transitioned into other uses. Seeing that we were quickly being surrounded by houses, in 2004, we submitted an application to develop the property, and the city accepted our application. Throughout the 12-year process, we worked diligently with various city representatives, groups, and committee members who assured us that the project was in keeping with the city's plan, that we met all requirements, and that we were doing the right thing. This land was purchased not for speculation but to farm. However, now that other farms that once neighbored our property have been developed, farming is no longer practical or viable. The Brokaw Nursery, who rented the ground for 40 years for their successful citrus and avocado nursery, dropped their lease in order to relocate their operation in anticipation of the property's development. For 3 years, we were unable to find someone to rent the land for agricultural use, primarily because of housing closely bordered the property. Residential neighbors have complained about dust, noise, workers coming at early hours, working late at night and on weekends, the smells, and the use of pesticides. All these activities are part and parcel to the normal farming operation. But due to these circumstances and others, our once successful family farm is quickly becoming impractical, unprofitable, and no longer viable. We began this process when I was in my 50s. I turned 70 this year. In the 60 years we have owned the property, our commitment to farming has not changed, but the decisions to annex farmland surrounding us and approve housing in its place, as well as increased expenses and decreasing returns from this property, has changed our ability to operate a successful, viable farm at this location. Because of the lengthy delays in the process, we have lost opportunities to expand our farming operation in the Las Posas Valley, where we have farmed for over 60 years. Conversion of this land from agriculture to residential use has been part of the city's plan for many years. The project will provide needed housing for Ventura residents. We have done everything the city has asked us throughout the process for more than a decade. We are part of this community. It is our home, and it has been for over 100 years. We will continue farming in Ventura County, but like any business, we must be physically realistic. Our viability as a family farm is contingent on the finalization of this project. We feel that it would be so very unfair not to grant this project annexation into the city and let us move on.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Venoni. And for clarification for my peers up here, you may have seen today's headline. On Monday, the Ventura City Council acted on a request of the Venoni family to seek annexation. So this is not on our agenda today, but it will be coming forward to us. Are there any questions of Mr. Venoni?
Just a comment,
Ms. Parks.
and that is probably one of the biggest impacts to farmland is putting development right next to it. And I think what you're seeing is just an example of that.
I think that
Yes.
was pretty well pointed out on Monday night, and I think he has given our city council a very apt visual description of watching the evolution around his land over the last 20 years. So,
Yeah.
thank you, Mr. Benoni.
Okay, thank you.
With that, I'll follow up with Mr. Daly, Vince Daly, who is the interested party in developing this. Mr. Daly, you have 5 minutes.
I have a slide that I don't know if it's appropriate. I did give him a thumb drive to show context, but it's up to you. If it's appropriate, I'd like to show that.
Context,
Just a picture of the property.
certainly, if that's
Okay,
part of
it's on
your...
the thumb drive that I gave to...
Oh, okay.
Well, we can just use our imagination. Thank you.
Do an
my-
what we call air maps.
My name is Vince Daly.
You have to
I have been
comment.
working with the Benoni family since 2004, and I can safely say this is the longest project I've ever worked on. But I have fallen in love with the family, and the fact that they couldn't farm anymore started back in 2004 when they saw the handwriting on the wall. They saw that sphere, they did a sphere change. They changed the general plan to residential all around them, including themselves. And over the years, they saw residential being built all the way up to their boundary, where now they're sharing a common boundary. So City Council, Carl Morehouse, made a great decision the other night to move it on for annexation. The project is consistent with the pre-annexation, the pre-zoning. It's consistent with the 2005 general plan. It's consistent with the 2009 Wells-Saticoy community plan. So it's sort of a belt and suspenders project, and it received unanimous approval all the way throughout. The city actually filed an application yesterday on this, so there was no time being wasted. They did an excellent job. It was a very complete package. What I want to speak to you about today is we did have about a 2-year delay between Planning Commission and City Council. Primarily, it was due to a letter received by LAFCo Executive Director that stated that the environmental document was not the appropriate environmental document. Now, we have attorneys and lots of words and lots of back and forth on this. I'm not going to speak to that. I'm not the expert on that. But I would say that the project was delayed 2 years so that the addendum, which was the vehicle they used, and you guys will hear more about this, was actually, in a sense, recirculated. Not required by CEQA, but was. We spent 2 years, and the city spent 2 years, I should say, dialing this in, addressing every single situation, and they came to the conclusion, the city did, that this was the adequate environmental document to use. The sort of rub that we have is that the executive director has stated that it's not, and has stated in meetings that he's not going to accept the application or process the application. He's making a determination that that LAFCO needs to be a lead agency or whatever, his arguments that feel like they've been addressed. The concern we have is we've submitted an application, and we would like to have due process. We would like to come and discuss this with you because this is a disagreement that the city has, and I think, and I won't speak for the city, and that the executive director has. My concern is that it gets rejected, sent back to us, and then we have to come back to maybe another one of these open forums and stress our differences. I think what I would ask is that the LAFCO respectfully agendize this so that we don't have to come back, and we can all be prepared to have the discussion if that's the way it's going to go. And we believe it's going to go that way because the executive director wrote a letter even last week, again, reiterating his position after lots of back and forth has been done. So we would respectfully request that, and we believe, and our attorneys believe, that you are the right board to make environmental determinations, ultimately. And so we would respectfully request that at your next meeting that you agendize this discussion in some fashion that you would do so that we're not coming in piecemeal and having to show up at these public comment periods. But I respect all you guys. I know LAFCO, and I told my daughter I was going to speak at LAFCO, and she thought it was a comedy club this morning, and I said no. I explained to her, and she got bored real quick after that. But it is orderly. This is not subject to SOAR. This property was positioned from the beginning to do this, and to have additional delays based on things and technical things that, again, CEQA is about disclosure. This project's been disclosed. It's been disclosed. There's nothing hidden out there about environmental impacts and what's going to go on. And I think the biggest environmental impact is the residential that encroached on the Venoni farm, which we reconciled, and the city did a good job with that. So thank you for hearing me out today, and I'll respect your decision, but we wanted to bring that to your attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Daly. Anybody have any questions? Remember, we cannot deliberate on this. It's not an agenda item. Ms. Ramirez.
Only this, I'd like to ask our council to, at the appropriate time, give us a briefing on the law, what's required of us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Third speaker I have on this is the City of Ventura's Community Development Director, Jeff Lambert, if you'd like to address us.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jeff Lambert, Community Development Director, City of Ventura. I really want to first thank you for letting us speak. I don't speak under public comment very often. I'm usually sitting somewhere where you are. But I wanted to make a couple comments today. One, I wanted to, and I apologize, I'm going to repeat some of what you just heard because I think it's important that you hear that. Number one, I want to remind the LAFCo Commission that the council on Monday night unanimously approved this annexation. I'm not sure we all saw that coming, but we had a great night on Monday night with a unanimous approval. I also want to remind the Commission that this project was approved by the Commission, the Planning Commission, earlier this year, also unanimously, and has also been long in the process for residential development. We filed our application yesterday, as Vince and Charles told you, and we're hopeful that this will be brought back to the Commission for action as quickly as possible. It's important that you know that not only did we not get a lot of comments. We got really no community opposition to this project. This project was very well received, and it really fills a gap in the city's planning process, and that's important for you to know as well. This property has long been planned for residential, not just in the 2009 community plan or the 2005 general plan, but the plan before that, the 89 plan. So this property has been designated for the use that has been approved for decades, and we're finally at a point where we have a project approved on that site. The city, as has been noted, did receive some critical letters from LAFCo staff. And I would say there's sort of two kinds of comments we received. One, that there's some procedural objections, particularly on the use of the addendum environmental document. And the other was raised some technical issues. I want to make sure the commission knows that on those procedural objections, we're very clear that they're unfounded. There's no legal justification for the city to do any more environmental than the addendum that we did. As you might know, CEQA has thresholds, and only if you hit those thresholds do you go beyond an addendum. And in this particular case, none of those thresholds have been met, and the addendum is the absolutely appropriate document. In addition, LAFCO comments when we had the EIR in 2009 for the community plan clearly stated that they intended to use that community plan EIR for future annexation decisions. So we think there's lots of grounds that the environmental documents that we've prepared are complete and ready for LAFCO action. All we really ask this morning under public comment is that this project be brought to, this annexation be brought to this body for a fair hearing. That's really all we're asking for, and we'd like that hearing to happen as quickly as possible. As this farmer has been waiting a long time, mostly the city's fault, but we're done with our step of the process, and we'd like to see LAFCO move us forward towards a hearing where we believe when we get to the merits of the case and the actual particulars of what's been raised, that we will be adequately responding, and the commission will be in a position to approve this annexation. Thank you very much.
Questions of Mr. Lambert? Ms. Rooney?
So what is the process in requesting an item placed on the agenda?
We'll turn to our legal counsel.
Thank you.
It's the chair's call. Initially, it's the executive officer's call, and then it's the chair's call. And then if any commissioner wants to appeal the chair's decision, for instance, to not place something on the agenda, then it will be brought to the full commission to decide whether an item's placed on the agenda.
So given that, Mr. Chair, I would ask your indulgence to place the item on the agenda at the next meeting.
I don't know procedurally if we can do that right now at the end of the agenda when we have future items. I believe that we can discuss that. Again, we're kind of constrained because this is not an agendized item, but in terms of information sharing with all of you, and sitting in my council role, we had a great deliberation on this on Monday night. And yes, LAFCO staff has submitted a letter disagreeing with the city's position with regards to the environmental document, both somewhat in content and partly in terms of usage of that document. And since the call to accept an application falls on our executive director, then that is why you're hearing the pleas to, I don't want to say override that capacity, but that's somewhat of what's being requested here, that we be able to hear it and not leave that just at the discretion of our executive director. So again, because we cannot legally go into this other than just to lay the background for you, I think we'll entertain that idea at the end when we talk about future agenda items. I think that's the appropriate place to put it on the agenda. I'll look to our counsel for further guidance.
But it would be, Chair Morehouse, however, in this case, it would be premature to put it on the agenda for a future meeting until the executive officer who received the application yesterday does what he's required to do under LAFCO law to see if it's a completed application.
Correct. Okay.
And then respond to it. So I think in that sense it's premature. However, you could put it on the agenda as an informational item for the next meeting for the executive officer just to report on the status.
Well, the procedure is that 30-day, I believe there's a 30-day review for the executive officer for the completeness of the application. He will then have to report out to this body as to his findings. At that time, then it would be the decision of the commission in toto to accept that decision of the executive officer or override it for consideration for agendizing for appropriate action. Is that my understanding? Is that correct?
That's generally correct, yes.
Okay. So maybe we should let nature run its course. We'll give our executive officer the chance to review it. And then, depending on his findings, if he accepts the application is complete, we will be seeing it regardless. If he doesn't, we will get that report, and then it's up to us whether to concur with that decision or whether we choose to move forward.
So if I heard you correctly, then at the next LAFCo meeting, then we will have an informational report about the application.
It's my
Is that right?
expectation. Mr. Loma, would you be bringing us your belief of the application's completeness in 30 days?
Well, I can certainly include the commission on any correspondence, because I will have to correspond with the city about the completeness of the application. I can certainly copy the commission at that time. That determination is going to occur before the next LAFCO meeting. And then if it's the commission's desire, I can do an informational item about the project at the next LAFCO meeting. It would probably not be for an approval or denial or what have you, but just informational.
Well, I think it's appropriate that the commission be kept abreast as you move forward with your communications with the city. Do I get concurrence on that from the commission?
And
Everybody?
I'd like to see a copy of the letter that was referenced here of 2 weeks ago, I think it was. So if you could distribute that, I'd appreciate it.
The copy of the letter that we sent to
Copy
the
of the
city?
letter that you sent to the city
It's in your
That was
packet.
last week.
That was
It's in the
distributed to the
packet.
commission.
It's in your packet.
Take a look.
It's in the packet here?
Yeah.
No, it was distributed to the commission on Monday.
Okay.
Got it.
Guess I didn't see it.
Okay, so we're all on the same page here now? All right, very good. All right, thank you all. That's the end of the public comments. No. It's the end of the public comments, so thank you. We'll move on to our consent agenda items. The consent items are number 7, minutes of the Ventura LAFCO meeting from May 18th, 2016. Excuse me, the LAFCO 16-05 Callegas Municipal Water District Annexation, Pleasant Valley Venture LLC, and number 9, the budget to actual reports for May, June, July, and August 2016. With that, I will, I'm sorry. I have a speaker for item 8, Mark Pettit, but that he says that it's only if questions are needed. Is there anything that anybody has questions about with regards to number 8? Seeing none, Mr. Pettit, I don't think your testimony is necessary. Okay, and is that under public comments, or is that a separate item? 13, very good. Okay, with that, so the chair will entertain a motion. Have a motion? Have a second.
Point of clarification, I was not here. Can I abstain on the minute? Should I abstain on the
Well,
minute?
let's do this. Why don't we break it out? We'll do 7 separately because of that. Sometimes that issue occurs. So let's do 7 separately, and then we'll do 8 and 9 collectively. So if Mr. Dandy, you'll rephrase your motion for item 7's acceptance? And the second by Mr. Cunningham on that. So with that, all in favor of item 7? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions?
I'm on abstention on.
Abstention, okay, I have 2 abstentions on 7 between Dandy and Friedman. Thank you. Okay, with that, then I'll entertain a motion for 8 and 9.
Could I ask a question on 8, and that's the water service? Is there water available?
According to Callegas Municipal Water District, there is.
And that's imported, I guess?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, we will have them approved as receive and files. Is that fine with the motion maker? Second. I have a second for that. Okay. So motion is to receive and file items 8 and 9. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? All right, then we'll move to our first public hearing item. That is number 10, the review of the LAFCO Conflict of Interest Code. I don't know which staff member is that, Mr. Boma?
Right, briefly. State law does require that local government agencies adopt a conflict of interest code. It also requires that every 2 years that conflict of interest code be reviewed and updated as necessary. The commission first adopted its conflict of interest code in 1993, and it was last amended in 2014. No changes to the current conflict of interest code, which is attached to your staff report, are being recommended this year. And we do recommend that the commission authorize me to sign a notice stating that no amendments are necessary to the code and transmit it to the clerk of the Board of Supervisors. Thank you.
Are there any questions of staff on this issue? Yeah, I think it's pretty straightforward. Most of us in most of our other capacities have gone through this drill as is required. So with that,
So
I have a motion out of Freeman, second out of Zaragoza. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? That passes unanimously. Move to our action items. Item number 11 is the presentation by the Ventura County Resource Management Agency Planning Division staff regarding the Ventura County General Plan update. The recommendation is to receive and file. Ms. Sussman, hello.
Hello. Good morning, Chair Morehouse and members of the Commission. My name is Shelley Sussman. I'm a planner at the county's planning division and a member of the General Plan Update team. And thank you for the opportunity to speak with you this morning about our ongoing project to update the general plan. Before summarizing that ongoing work to update the general plan, I wanted to briefly review the content and organization of our existing plan. The state requires 7 elements be included in every general plan, and those are listed right here. There's conservation, open space, housing, noise, safety, land use, and circulation. The county's general plan does address all of these elements in several different documents, which together comprise our general plan. We have a single document that includes all of the goals, policies, and programs for all of the 7 elements and topic areas included in our plan. And we have 4 technical appendices: resources, hazards, land use, and public facilities and services. And those are basically the background documents for the 7 topic areas, the 7 elements, and they support the development of all of the goals, policies, and programs. We also have several area plans that deal with planning considerations in specific locations around the county. Some of them include the Ojai Valley. We just recently updated our Saticoy area plan last year. We have one in El Rio, Lake Sherwood, the coastal area, and so on, 10 of them. The last comprehensive update to our general plan was in 1988. However, there was an update in 2005, a technical update. We basically focused on integrating updated population and transportation forecasts, and we extended the timeline of the general plan to 2020. We also have a housing element that covers the years from 2014 to 2021, and of course, the housing element is an integrated part of the general plan. Getting to the GPU details, as I mentioned, the plan expires in 2020, and so staff in the Resource Management Agency and the Planning Division specifically have started work in earnest on the general plan update. The team consists of our GPU project manager, Susan Curtis, Clay Downing, who's here with me, our planning tech, and me. We also have a consultant team working on the project, managed by Mintier Harnish. They're a consulting firm out of Sacramento. They have a lot of experience working on county general plans throughout the state, and they've assembled a crew of consultants that are dealing with a variety of topics: transportation, environmental issues, economics, climate change, and so on. Besides the 2020 expiration date of the general plan, one of the other motivations to update the plan is the opportunity to integrate new regulations and new planning concepts into the plan. And there are 3 themes that will be integrated into our new plan. We have a healthy communities focus, a sustainability focus, and a resiliency focus. And in addition to those themes and the integration of the required 7 elements, the Board of Supervisors directed that the general plan update contain 3 additional elements. agriculture, water, and economic development. And finally, there are some really important related projects that we're working on concurrently with the general plan update. The zoning update to ensure that our zoning code is consistent with our general plan and any changes we make that would require changes to our zoning code. A concurrent housing element update, which, as I mentioned, will expire in 2021. And a habitat connectivity ordinance. Here are the overall phases of the project, beginning with project initiation in the winter of 2015 on through final adoption in spring of 2020. Some of the milestones along the way include the completion of some important documents, our background document, for example, which we're working on now, the affirmation of the vision and guiding principles that will be embedded in the general plan, on through the creation and evaluation of alternatives, the draft of the general plan, and of course environmental review and an EIR, on through preparation of the final document and adoption. To recap the process thus far in just a little more detail, scoping on the project began in early 2015. Kim and other folks from RMA and the Planning Division went out into the community to conduct some initial interviews and workshops with community leaders to really try to get a sense of the issues that were out there, the issues people felt should be integrated into a general plan update. There was a joint study session held between the Planning Commission and the board, of course, to get their thoughts and really have them provide staff with a framework for the general plan update. A contract was executed with Mintier Harnish at the end of 2015, and our team's work began really in earnest in January and February of this year. And since that time, we've done a lot of community outreach. We've gone out to all but one of the municipal advisory councils. We created a website. We went to the county fair and set up a booth and talked to hundreds of people and got input from people all over. And we've also conducted, notably, 12 community outreach workshops through the summer in all portions of the county, from Lockwood Valley to the county line at the fire station down there. And we really tried to ask them, you know, the questions we were focusing at that time were, what do you like about the county? What issues do you see that the county should be dealing with? And do you have suggestions or thoughts about how to address those issues? And I'll touch on that at the very end, what we heard from people. It's key that the general plan reflect input from many different people and advisory bodies, and we have a structure to obtain that input. Offering technical assistance are 7 focus groups that we set up at the beginning of the year. And these focus groups are made up of subject matter experts in the field, different perspectives and expertise. And the 7 focus groups include agriculture, climate change, economic development, housing, open space and recreation, transportation and infrastructure, and water. We also have a technical advisory committee, and those are our in-house county experts, primarily agency directors. And we come to them when we want to make sure that the information that we're putting out for the public is accurate and up to date and reflects the current programs that they know a lot about and manage. We have a process set up to go out to the MACs throughout the process. I think we have 4 MAC meetings, or 4 sets of MAC meetings for all 6 of our MACs. And the board notably identified the Planning Commission as their main advisory body, and you'll see in a following slide, I think we're set to present to the Planning Commission 16 times over the course of this project. And of course, woven throughout all this is public comment and input and involvement. And towards that end, here's sort of a summary slide of all of the opportunities for that involvement. There's public workshops slated to happen at various important points during the process. So again, to identify the assets, issues, and opportunities, we've done that with our 12 community meetings that we had. affirmation of the vision and guiding principles, and so on. There'll also be an opportunity for the public to review and comment on public documents, and of course, attend and comment at public meetings. And you'll see again, for the Planning Commission, we have 13 work sessions scheduled and 3 hearings, and a lesser number for the board, but still we'll be checking in with the board frequently as well. In addition to meetings and hearings, we have several tools to update the public. We created a website for this project, vc2040.org. I encourage you all to log in and take a look. We have a process of email notifications. I think we have 600 or 700 people so far on our email list. And that's, when we want to get the word out really quickly about a document that's up for review or a meeting that's happening. We're working with the CEO's Public Information Officer on press releases. We'll be generating newsletters. And one of the things we've really tried to integrate is outreach to Spanish speakers in the county. And so, Clay, correct me if I'm wrong, but there is a functionality included in our webpage where any information can be immediately translated into Spanish. All of our written material is in bilingual, and when we went out to the public in the summer, we had 3 meetings with translation services available. And last but certainly not least, both Susan and Clay are bilingual, so if there's ever an occasion at a public meeting where we didn't happen to have a translator present, we always have somebody on staff who can make that connection. One other important feature of our outreach is we're really trying to make it interactive, not just PowerPoint presentations by people like me, but, getting people out of their seats and telling us, what they think. We're putting a lot of effort into trying to ask the right questions, trying to really get at what people are thinking and asking them what they think some of the solutions might be to the issues they're raising. So as I mentioned, we did hear from people over the summer, and we created a word cloud out of some of the comments that we got. We captured kind of the top 10 things that people were concerned about that we heard at our meetings this summer. And the larger the font size, the more frequently that issue was mentioned. So perhaps not surprisingly, water tops the list. Followed closely by the preservation of agriculture and farmland, and you can see it for yourself, transportation, economy, public safety, housing. What are we going to do to plan for our aging population? Just the gamut of issues that we deal with and that people are concerned about and will certainly be integrated at some level in the general plan. So that does it for me, and I'm open for questions if anybody has anything.
Does anyone have any questions for Ms. Sussman? Ms. Parks?
Is LAFCo in the focus groups?
I don't think so.
Is it in the, you also have one that's with the staff and all that? Is LAFCo part of that?
They'll be given an opportunity to review our public documents.
LAFCO staff does not sit on any of these committees or participate as part of any of the committees, but we do review to the extent possible all the documents, all the drafts that are provided to us. Given the workload and that we have only 2 staff, it sometimes is difficult to review these documents in detail, but we do our best.
So not the technical advisory committee, not the focus group.
Ms. Ramirez?
Thank you, Ms. Sussman. I think it is so great to really try to engage the public. It's difficult to do, and I really appreciate the attention to the Spanish-speaking, and we have other people speaking other languages. In our city of Oxnard, 1/3 of our households are monolingual, non-English speakers, so I really do appreciate that. I want to recommend to you and others involved, as well as our board here, information that was presented a couple of weeks ago at California Adaptation Forum. that was organized by the Local Government Commission. I did attend. I did make a couple of presentations about Ormond Beach wetlands restoration, which is a little bit, there's county involvement in there, as well as the city. It was very interesting about people all over California trying to deal with the challenges that you've mentioned here, sea level rise, climate, including things like heat that's very dangerous to life, all life. And I see that is, really appreciate seeing health and all policies inserted into the general plan, because I know this was adopted by the Board of Supervisors a few months ago, and I'd like to see our city do that too. We're getting there.
Right. One thing you might be interested to know, we've been in very close connection with our public health partners, and it just so happened that they were coming out with their public health assessment. They do it, I think, every 3 or 5 years. And because of the connection we had made, they actually attended, I think, almost all, if not all, of our 12 outreach meetings. So they stood up for their 3 minutes and gave their presentation, and they had a survey that they wanted people to take about public health issues of importance to them. And so there really was a really good opportunity for that kind of partnering and to bring the discussions of health together with land use and planning, and that was a success story.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Excellent presentation.
Oh, thank you.
And I've heard it over and over again. The more
Yeah.
you see it, the more you learn. In this room.
Sorry, Linda.
You have us for 3 times, maybe I'd send it for 5 times. But on the marketing, have you done it in Spanish radio, like Radio Lazar and La M?
I know we worked with Bill Nash, and Radio Laser was one of the radio outlets on our list. I can't honestly say that I know for sure whether an announcement made it on, but we did talk to him about reaching out to Radio Laser.
And the other one is too is Vida, the newspaper Vida is a good one too.
Right, yeah. We did go over a lengthy
Muñoz.
list of Spanish focused outlets with him, and that wasn't one of the things that I was closely monitoring, so if you're curious, we can get back to you.
Thank you.
Okay.
But excellent presentation, and that's clear, and like I said, the more I see it, the more I learn. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Rooney.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I just want to step back a couple of slides previously where the hot topics were.
Okay.
Right. So when we talk about transportation, are we talking about people movement or goods movement?
I would say mostly people movement. One of the things, as I said, that we tried to do was really try to problem solve with people who were making comments. So one of the tasks that we have yet to do is link kind of these topic areas with the explanatory comments that were made, because we tried to say, okay, well, you care about transportation, but what does that really mean? Do you feel like, we need to have better sidewalks or more bike trails, or exactly what does that mean? So we are assembling that report, and that report will be public. But I would say, just based on my complete anecdotal experience at these meetings, it was mostly the movement of people, whether it be in vehicles or pedestrians or bicycles or transit.
And if you could, I couldn't find it here on the website, but I'm wondering how you are integrating the goods movement in the county into the general plan, and what your plans are to collaborate with the Oxnard Harbor District.
Well, we have a whole section in our background report, our draft background report on goods movement. Right now it's being reviewed internally by our county family, including folks involved in the ports. We do have a port representative on our focus group. I think it's the Economic Development Focus Group. And so they'll have I don't know the name off the top of my head. We have like 95 focus group members.
But,
I don't. Okay.
Madam Chair, Mr. Chair, one of the big important things is 2 things: is transit and also the corridor, the Rice Road that connects the harbor to the 101 and so forth. And we discussed
that issue has been raised.
Yeah.
That corridor issue.
That's right. It's one of the important issues.
I remember
We've discussed
it being
that
one of the issues raised by one of the focus
and
group members.
VCTC, is
Yeah.
really, supporting that too. And the transit and transportation of goods is extremely important too.
Yeah,
Right.
I think that the Harbor District is often overlooked when we talk about transportation in this county, as there's no representations directly on VCTC from the Harbor District, which is the goods movement arm in this county. And so I think it's critical that as we look at integrating an intermodal corridor, that we have that collaboration with the county. So
Right.
I would appreciate knowing who it is that's representing the Harbor District,
Okay,
and we'd love to have them be a part of that discussion.
okay.
Thank you.
Other questions? Mr. Dandy?
Add on to that, I think not only the Harbor District, but also, we've heard this last year, the issue of transporting sands and gravel, concerns about transporting oils and other hazardous materials throughout the county. Those things obviously need to be considered as well as an important part of the transportation and economy side of the equation.
Okay.
I will.
Clay is busy taking notes.
I will chime in. First of all, thank you for sharing this very important effort with LAFCo. And I appreciate your outreach efforts. I want to laud you on your selection of Mintier Harnish. I've known Larry Mintier, one of the principals, for a long time. It's a good selection. If you went back to your second slide, I think it would answer some of our commissioners. As somebody who in a previous life lived in previous incarnation through the 2005 update, and having taught a class at Cal State Northridge on general plans, I think some of the concerns, the way the county's general plan is structured, FYI, is in the technical appendices. And the focus on the public facilities and services in response to Ms. Rooney's question, the previous predecessor of the executive director for the harbor, Mr. Taramina, didn't participate. We reached out to him, and we failed to get a response. And there was serious consideration about the rail line at that time, as many of the things that are mentioned. There are a whole. The reason we should all pay attention to this, whether you're in a special district, I'm pretty sure that the city planning departments are engaged because they
Yes,
have the
they are,
planning
through CC.
group
Yes.
managers meeting every month.
Right.
I think it's kind of sad. Here we've got SOAR efforts trying to get everybody on the same page to 2050. Unfortunately, the cities are not all on the same cycle as the county. In a perfect world, we would have these kind of building blocks. We'd all have our 10-year, our every day 10-year update with a 20-year horizon matching what the county's doing. The city of Ventura is going to be undertaking our 10-year update starting next year. So it's going to be slightly off sync, but I think it's very appropriate because when we talk about land use relationships that incorporates all the required elements, which is transportation, circulation, water, all these other things, open space, conservation, those are mandated elements that have to look in a very broad array to all these issues that sometimes we face up here and we certainly face in our individual roles outside of here. And so it's important to have those in sync with each other so that the thing actually works. And looking through a SCAG perspective, which is like 35,000 feet, and the time that I spend there, it would be even more perfect world in terms of both transportation and the economy to have these things fitting together, but they simply do not because each of our cities are on a different schedule for when we do our general plan updates, both in terms of required timing and when we have money to do that and when we have staff to do that. But I do want to laud the county staff for this very major outreach. I think it's very, very much a kind of change of direction from what has been done in the past. Having lived through that, I think this is a tremendous outreach effort. And again, it's important that if you're in a city or if you're in a district, that your staff there pay very much attention to what's going on with this to make this fit together so that we're all on the same page and having the same direction, sharing the same information. The county general plan, when you read through it, at least I was forced to read through it for several years, has a lot of data and information. It's an amazing document that gives you a lot of background about this county, and even the sub-area plans, which are those areas that are unincorporated, so what's going on like Oak Park or the areas outside of Camarillo, all those that sometimes show up on our doorstep for annexation later, Satakoy, whatever the case may be, are all very important documents. So I certainly laud you for your efforts on this. I think it's a major step forward and appreciate what you're trying to do. So that any further comments? Ms.
I
Freeman?
just have a question. Under the housing portion of it, is there, and land use, are there any recommendations for changing in density? And second, under public facilities and service, is there conversation about recreation, active recreation, or is it just open space?
Well, we're just at the beginning of having those conversations, but I would say recreation is a big topic. Lots of people raise it and talk about it. In terms of trails, in terms of planning for recreation for seniors in our existing communities, those issues are coming up. With respect to the housing element, we just kind of basically have a new housing element, 2014 to 2021. We dealt with density issues based on, the county's population. Our density was 20 dwelling units to the acre. So that's kind of the standard that has been integrated into the housing element. And until we, start the process of working with SCAG on new RENA numbers and, the whole HCD process, we're proceeding with a 20 dwelling unit per acre assumption for density.
Again, there's kind of two parts to it. The technical appendices is kind of an accounting. It's a major listing of what's out there. And then your goals, policies, and programs set where you desire to go, and that will be hopefully expressed in this document as to the need for and desire to move towards greater recreational opportunities,
right.
At least within the county, the unincorporated purviews. So there's two moving parts to that. So.
Correct. And Kim reminded me that all of our focus groups and all of our focus group members are on the website. And we do have a representative from the Port of Hueneme, Donna Toteva Lacayo. I don't know if that's how you pronounce her name. But, and she was present at our first focus group meeting. So hopefully that answers your question. Okay, very good. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, with that. Thank you again very much for bringing this forward to us, sharing this with us. It is a very important document, and we shall all hopefully stay engaged throughout. Okay, with that,
thank you.
Thank you. We'll move on now to item number 12, which is the contract for professional audit services. Oh, that was an action to receive and file. I apologize. Okay, motion? Okay, I have a motion to receive and file. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Very good. Thank you very much. All right. So the next item is our contract for professional audit services. Mr. Wilma.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Commissioner's handbook policies do provide for annual audits of the Commission's financial statements by an independent accounting firm. So in accordance with this policy, staff began the selection process for an auditor. We sent out a request for proposals back in late June with proposals due by September, early September. The proposal that we were asking for was audit services for last fiscal year with an option to extend those services for this fiscal year as well as next fiscal year. We did include a schedule in the RFP, and we had anticipated to select that auditing firm by the end of September and then bring a contract for those services to the Commission in October. However, as you'll see, one of the items on this agenda is the cancellation of the October meeting. Now, in response to the RFP, which we sent to over 20 audit firms, we received only a single proposal, and that was from Vavernick, Trine, and Day, who have done our audits for the past 5 or 6 years, and they've done them competently. LAFCo staff did contact staff from the County Auditor's Controller's Office about the merits of doing a second RFP process in the hopes of eliciting additional responses. However, they confirmed that a second RFP process would be unwarranted if the Commission did do its due diligence in trying to get multiple responses, which we did. In addition, a second RFP process would delay the audit, and it wouldn't necessarily result in any more proposals being submitted. Now, the proposal from Vavernick, Trine, and Day does meet all of the criteria in the RFP as reviewed by the County Auditor Controller's Office, and the amount, $8,500, is within the budget for audit services that was adopted by the Commission. Now, pursuant to the handbook, any contract or agreement over $5,000 does require commission approval, and this, of course, is for $8,500. But as I said, our schedule was to choose the auditing firm and then bring that contract to the commission in October. However, if the commission does cancel the October meeting, we would have to carry that over into November, and that would delay the audit process. However, we did identify an option. That this option was exercised last time we went through this process, and that would be for the commission to authorize the chair to review and execute a contract for audit services with Vavrinick, Trine, and Day that is prepared by staff, reviewed by the County Auditor Controller's Office, and also reviewed by LAFCo staff for an amount not to exceed $8,500. So the chair would be able to execute that agreement. And then, of course, we would return in November with a receive and file item regarding that contract. So that is staff's recommendation, is to authorize the chair to execute that contract.
Thank you, Mr. Holman. It is, I will say, a little disappointing that we didn't have better responses, but it's your belief that we've had a very good relationship with the current auditor as it is, and they have a good track record. So, questions?
Move approval.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion and a second for approval. Further discussion? Okay, oh, Mr. Dandy.
Is this the same firm that's doing the auditing for the county of Ventura as well?
Correct.
Yes.
Yes, Mr. Ross.
How come we had so few firms come back to us?
I really don't know. More than 20. It's interesting, all of the Southern California LAFCOs, or a majority of them, got together and issued an RFP for audit services for each of them under one contract. They got no responses.
Oh, my gosh.
We probably don't pay enough as LAFCOs for the amount of work they have to put in. I don't know what it is. Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Okay, that passes unanimously. We will now move on to item number 13, which is the Commissioner's Handbook, Section 1.4.3. The LAFCO is a responsible agency discussion, which is continued from our May 18th meeting. Item 12.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. This item was continued from the May 18th meeting, which seems so long ago. As you recall, at the Commission's March 24th, 2016 special meeting referred to as the Agricultural Mitigation Workshop Part 2, the Commission directed staff to return to it with policy options regarding the potential mitigation of farmland that would be converted by proposals that are going to come before the Commission. The policy would encourage lead agencies preparing those environmental documents to also consider mitigation measures. Now, at its April 20th meeting, the Commission did approve the following policy language included in its administrative supplement to CEQA. And it states that for projects that would result in the conversion of prime agricultural land to non-agricultural uses, the environmental document should consider mitigation measures to address the potential loss of agricultural land as provided for in the government code. So this is current policy. This was added to the Commissioner's Handbook. Now, at that meeting, the Commission also directed staff to develop a listing of available mitigation measures that these lead agencies could consider, as well as related matters to these mitigation measures. And the Commission suggested that this listing be either posted on the website, the LAFCO website, and referred to in correspondence or included in the correspondence. So we did come up with some proposed language consistent with the Commission's direction, and this is it. It's also in your staff report on page 45 in its entirety. The first section just kind of reiterates that the Commission adopted the policy that I just read. And the second part contains the suggested mitigation measures that could be considered. Again, this is not a mandate, it's not a requirement, it's a suggestion to consider them. And it provides that mitigation measures that could be considered in the environmental document include, but are not necessarily limited to, the following: agricultural conservation easements, agricultural land mitigation bank and credits, fee title, or fees in lieu of those other mitigation measures. And finally, when considering mitigation measures, lead agencies should also consider related factors, including but not necessarily limited to the following: permanent preservation of other prime agricultural land, such as in a 1-to-1 ratio or greater to that proposed to be converted; preservation of land of a similar soil quality and/or classification as that proposed to be converted; preservation of land that possesses the related resources, such as water, drainage, to ensure that ongoing agricultural production would be viable; and preservation of land located within Ventura County, but not necessarily within the lead agency sphere of influence. So we did attempt to follow your direction and come back with this language for your approval, and if you are okay with it, we will start referring to it or including it in correspondence on appropriate projects.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Goma. And first of all, let me say that I'm appreciative of the fact that we're not making it mandatory, that we're making it should instead of shall. That was something that was a concern of many of us up here. Questions of Mr. Goma at this time? Ms. Parks.
I'm thinking of the mitigation measure of transfer of development rights. I don't know if we have any cities or the county doing that, but that might be a future option, so to preserve farmland as a mitigation measure. I'm throwing it out there.
Okay. Well, we could add that through an action of the commission, I believe, to put another bullet point for TDRs as a potential mitigation.
Carl, do you know of any cities that are doing that, or anyone in the county that's doing that?
I don't know of anyone currently, and I don't want to say that's passé. It's kind of funny that bubbled up very much in the 80s, and it seems to have kind of drifted away over time. I'm not sure why. San Luis County was using it quite a while ago. I don't know if they still actively or not.
And frankly, I mean, this would be agricultural land typically associated with an annexation, so it would be designated by the general plan. The county's general plan is agriculture. I don't know that they would have any development rights per se to transfer to elsewhere. Yeah, it is.
It's just not close enough to it. So, Ms. Ramirez.
Just as an example, the Nature Conservancy has conducted several projects with conservation easements along Santa Clara River, and in process something out at Ormond. So, terrific ideas.
Ms. Rooney?
Yes, thank you so much for the information. You know, as I recall our last meeting, and I went back and watched the tape just to make sure of what we agreed upon and decided, it was very clear at that point that the majority of this body asked that this not be mandatory, not be it was not mandatory. Things were to be encouraged, to be looked at. I don't see in what's proposed here that it's clear enough for an applicant to say, oh, is this mandatory or is this voluntary? Is it encouraged? And so there's no language in this item right here that would indicate that it is not mandatory. As I read it, it looks like that this is something that the applicant must do, even though, yes, shall is not in there, but it says should. But it doesn't give that caveat to say, you know, here are some items that could be looked at, which we all discussed at the last meeting when we talked about this, that it's encouraged. So I would like to see us strengthen this, if this is going to be placed on the website, where that will be, but for us to have a caveat very clear at the beginning of this, that this is not mandatory, that it is voluntary and encouraged, is what, as this board decided at the last meeting.
So it sounds like you would prefer to change the word should to could.
Well, perhaps, and I would like to see this at the very beginning, that this is not mandatory, but encouraged. And because I think that if you look at this and if it's referred to by staff in a written communication or something else, that the applicant is going to see this is coming from LAFCo policies, because it talks about here policies first, and then it goes into a list of items, which would give the impression that this is something that they must do. So that's where I would like to see a caveat, a statement in there that starts this discussion as it's encouraged.
Okay, Ms. Freeman.
I had the same concern and went back and looked at what we had done in the workshops and at our subsequent meeting. And because ag land conversion falls into such various different categories, those that are within city general plans, those that are outside city general plans, those that are in the curb, those are outside the curb. And I think it should be made more explicit that the could is really a could, and that depending on the circumstances of that agricultural land, there's more flexibility. I mean, if it's outside the curb and there's a vote, and then that would probably come with mitigation. But if it's inside the curb and within the general plan of the city, that it's going to be converted, I think it needs to be made more explicit on the differences. And I'm not sure what would happen if an application comes to LAFCo that's within the city's general plan and has been anticipated for conversion, what LAFCO's position would be in a recommendation for annexation. I don't think this clarifies that. I mean, I think what would happen, or what would staff's recommendation be to the LAFCO board if it's already within a city's general plan? I'm not sure it's clear enough that there is not a mandate.
Ms. Ramirez?
Well, you know, these are legal words, should, could, would, may, and I'd actually like our counsel, always looking for legal direction here, because consider seems to wipe out the intent, the mandatory intent of should. It doesn't say must, it says should consider, which I don't know that could we get a quick off the top of your head reading?
Well, the language is certainly discretionary. The could, the should, and as I've counseled the commission, I don't think we have the commission has the legal authority to actually impose these as requirements. So to the extent any language in here intends to do that, it wouldn't be legally supportable. So I think the issue that Commissioner Rooney is raising is, do you kind of add an overarching sentence, perhaps not necessarily changing the could and shoulds that are in here, but some overarching sentence that says none of this is required, it's encouraged.
Though something here is required, right? What is it that's required?
I'm sorry?
I guess there are two issues. One is, obviously, state law requires that it be considered. That's what state law says, correct?
Within the context of CEQA, correct.
Okay, so
correct.
that part, but regarding the specifics, I think it's fine to say where appropriate, you may want to consider. I mean, all that stuff works for me, because this is just giving them suggestions. But there's no doubt in terms of whether you have to look at or don't have to look at mitigation measures. That's already state law, right? Yeah.
Let me, I do have 3 public speakers on this particular item, and maybe that will give the commission a little more insight for our consideration before we take action. So Mr. Wilm is finished with his presentation. So Lynn Jensen, if you'd like to approach us. And you have up to 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good morning. Lynn Jensen with Ventura County CoLab. The language that was to be included in the administrative supplement to the Commission Handbook was voted unanimously by LAFCo on April 20th, 2016. And what it says is, for projects that would result in the conversion of prime agricultural land to non-agricultural uses, the environmental document should consider mitigation measures to address the potential loss of the agricultural land as provided under the Government Code section. And this is really saying that if they don't do mitigation measures, which they have to anyway, then LAFCO could come back and deny the application based on that. What I'm seeing then in the video, reviewing the video, the comments that were made by the commission are, Commissioner Morehouse, create a list that will not be mandatory, although it will be for guidance purposes only. Executive Officer Loma, not written but adhered to. Commissioner Rooney, not adhered to but to be considered. Commissioner Parks, list of options that are not required but could be considered. Suggested options on the website, not perceived as mandatory, not all-inclusive informational item. Commissioner Freeman, here's a list of possible ways. Doesn't mean it's part of the guidelines. Bring it back at the next meeting, and how to present on the website. Commissioner Ramirez, people to have access to what other communities are doing. educational, but not forcing. Keep in mind the following discussions that we've been having at these ag mitigation workshops. Land use planning is not within LAFCo's authority, and the Commission cannot require specific mitigation measures. The CEQA process already requires consideration of mitigation measures for loss of prime farmland. Projects such as Santa Paula's East Area 1 in 2015 resulted in both agricultural and open space easements for mitigation measures for development, and also lead agencies do not have to adopt mitigation measures, and economic feasibility is a great consideration. The staff recommendation quotes the Commissioner's handbook and makes it look like what follows is part of the handbook requirements. If I was an applicant, I would be very confused. I would not know that this wasn't part of the handbook and may not look back at it. CoLab recommends a clear statement that the suggested language following the adopted handbook measures are not in the Commissioner's handbook. This will certainly be muddied over time. Again, applicants will be thinking that this language is in the handbook, and because it says should, if they don't consider it, then perhaps LAFCo would deny the application. The first bullet points are could be considered, but the second bullet point says should be considered. Direction from the commissioners, again, clearly suggested that measures would not be a requirement and not be interpreted as mandatory. And I agree with Commissioner Freeman that it really depends on where the project is in terms of what mitigation measures would be required. And we also would like to know where this would go on the website, what kind of context it would be. This has been a long road of consideration with many meetings and participant of many experts. The cities need to be able to execute their general plans, and they need to be able to mitigate existing hopscotch development, as you're seeing in the city of Ventura, where farmland is completely surrounded by urban uses. And so we're concerned that this could interfere with that. Planned developments in the future, then, must provide adequate buffers to protect the farmland in the urban interface. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Jensen. And to that effect, Mr. Daly, you wish to come back and talk along those lines? Again, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. We're here waiting to, obviously, the last item to see if we get a date, but this was a little confusing. The handbook thing, sometimes it'd be good if it was a little more descriptive on what it's doing. The concern I have is just a guy who's trying to provide housing in Ventura County. We respect the lines of SOAR. I actually took a project to public vote, North Bank, and we lost pretty handily. So the message was sent, don't mess with SOAR. So now we have projects inside the curb line, and that's what we have left. And so that's what I'm focused on and working on, and it's getting more challenging. This is really challenging because now we're looking at property. We're protecting SOAR as a county. We're agreeing to protect those resources. And then we're going into properties that are inside curb lines, in many cases already have sphere lines. And we're sort of, when I read this, it's a should be. And so now there's a list there of all the shoulds. I take the shoulds and say it's got to be 1-to-1. I got to find the right water. I got to go down the list. It's just economically infeasible to do, and it's not very feasible to do at all. It's basically requiring the landowner, in this case, if it applied to the Vanonis, they would have to go out and find a perfect property to match their property, and yet it's inside and being planned for development. It's inside the curb line. So I think for us, as a guy who's trying to move housing forward for the county and lives out here, I think it'd be really good to make it a lot more clear. And I think that Mr. Walker had a good point. One thing about, we can put it in there, but it's not legal. Well, that requires going to court, and that's just not fair to people that are waiting for housing. So I would like it to be as clear as possible. We're not, we're moving pretty fast out there, but we also like to know what the rules are. And I think the rules, we're trying to follow by the rules. We get SOAR, we're trying to do the right thing, we're trying to develop inside. Layering on, after you're done with the CEQA process, having other land use regulations when we get to this point, it's just it's infeasible at points to provide the housing. So I respect that you guys make it as clear as possible because we're the people interpreting it. We don't always have a team of lawyers sitting aside. It's sometimes me and my engineer and architect trying to figure it out. So thank you very much.
So your interpretation of what we're proposing sounds like to you as, I don't want to say a layperson, but somebody who's engaged in development, that it's too mandatory? Is that what you're suggesting? It sounds like it's too mandatory, although it seems advisory by saying should.
It's too mandatory, and it's too after the fact. After CEQA, it's a LAFCo issue, and now we have another body to go through. And so both, that language, yes. To answer your question, yes, Chair.
But just in sharing with you in process, and again, staff and our legal counsel can correct me if I'm wrong, but the intention is during the review by a jurisdiction that's looking at something that early on LAFCO would enter into the discussion about what would be faced when you get to LAFCO. So hopefully that list of things would be early on in the process, not by the time it just gets to us. That's been one of the struggles we've had as a commission, is when it does get to us, these things have been raised, whether or not they were brought up early enough in the process for a jurisdiction. So anyway, any questions of Mr. Daly? Okay, I have one more speaker on
Thank
this,
you.
and that's Mr. Lambert from the city of Ventura.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I actually am glad the agenda item's on the screen. My first concern is I didn't know this was the agenda item. I don't think that agenda really describes the item, and I think it's hard for the public to know that this is what you're talking about based on the way the agenda is written. So that's my sort of first concern I want to raise to this body, that I didn't know this was here, except I was here for the earlier conversation. So I think that's important, because I think the public didn't know that you were having this conversation today. Number two, I think the county's policy on agricultural preservation is very clear. And cities all know the rules about how to preserve agricultural land. So I think that's important. I'm not sure another layer is necessary. I also think the wording is very important. I think that it's important that the discretion is at the city's discretion, and the way it's worded here, the words are important. It makes it sound like if the city doesn't do what LAFCO thinks they should have done, LAFCO will then hold the city accountable when the annexation comes. I don't think that's the way this is supposed to be worked, and that's my concern. So I would actually ask, since this is new to me and we didn't see this on the agenda, that at least you don't provide any direction today, other than maybe ask that this come back when we've had a chance to look at the words, because the words are really important. I'd like to be able to make sure we have good feedback on the actual words you use and how they'll be used and implemented going forward. Thank you very much.
Mr. Lambert, to your recollection, has this come up? I know that you have your regular monthly meetings with all the planning directors throughout the county. Has this come up as a topic of conversation with that group? And
I'm looking at Kim because she goes better than I do. Better attendee than I am to those meetings, but I'm not sure.
Thank you, Chair Morehouse. My name's Kim Perlhart. I'm the planning director for the County of Ventura. It hasn't really come up, and I would really appreciate an opportunity for it to come up. Jeff and I were just talking, saying I was down here on another item as well, and I had no idea that this agenda item was what you were going to be talking about. So I get a lot of agendas and I scan through them, but had it said we're going to talk about ag mitigation, right, we would have been down here, because I was participating in every meeting up until then, and I think also the farming community would have been more well represented here as well had the agenda item been different. So I mean, I would agree with Mr. Lambert that from the county's perspective, I would like an opportunity to look at it a little bit more carefully, because we do a lot of these documents, right? And so we have the guidelines for early development, we have our agricultural policy, we have our initial study assessment guidelines. So we're hoping we give the best information possible to our customers that are here saying, how do we preserve ag land? So we're going all the way along, working with LAFCO, right? But we would hate to get to the end to say, well, we should have done something in an environmental document, and we didn't. This 1-to-1 ratio, this creating new agricultural land in Ventura County, I'm not sure how that's going to be accomplished. These are very specific agricultural mitigation measures that I'm not sure that we could do. So if we came up to it and we said, well, we can't do it, and then you come all the way to LAFCO and you said, well, you should have, that will be an interesting discussion. So for me, I would simply like more time to talk about it with the city planning directors and the county planning director and Kai as well, to really understand how this would work.
Okay, appreciate that, because again, as it works, and the role of the commission here is generally with annexations. The issue has arisen because of annexations that have occurred and concerns about agricultural land that's being now incorporated into a city. we know that we have perhaps two cities, probably isn't relevant to Port Hueneme and somewhat to Ojai, but certainly the rest of us who have cities that may be faced with annexations in some form or fashion, that the process is if the city is doing a project and addresses these things, then how will it be viewed through the LAFCo lens? And clearly I would want the planning directors to weigh in on that, because it does have an impact on the city's projects and how that relationship works to this body. So if you'd be good enough, Ms. Brillhart, to fill out a speaker card, just for the record. And does anybody have any questions of Ms. Brillhart or Mr. Lambert?
Mr. Chair.
Everybody.
Okay, well, let me start with Mr. Zergo.
You know, I've heard this morning, I've been in LAFCO for many, many years, and I always hear that, because I was a city member too, that this LAFCO's not working with the city's not working with LAFCO. My recommendation is we ought to have a study session at LAFCO 101 and invite all the cities and all the planners and so forth to understand LAFCO's responsibility and the city's responsibilities about CEQA and so forth. And my understanding that we're responsible for CEQA and the cities for land use and so forth. But I think we need to have an understanding between the cities and LAFCO and what our responsibilities are and what the cities and planners' responsibilities are. And I'd like to propose that we have a LAFCO 101 and invite all the planners and cities to understand exactly what LAFCO's responsibility is and what the cities and other planners are.
Okay, let me park that idea for a moment. We'll come back to it.
I understand that, but I want to share that now
Sure.
because I've heard Mr. Lambert not really happy with the process, and I heard it twice already and so forth. And so anyway, I just wanted to share that now.
Okay, Ms. Parks.
I agree that a better title on the agenda to describe what it is. If you're continuing something, the whole description should be there. The reason I think that we got to this point, and we've been doing it for years, working on this one particular item, is because we get environmental documents that are required to look at mitigation measures, are required to just look at them. They have to consider them, and they do not. I think 1 out of 100 may actually follow the state law that considers alternative mitigation measures, or consider any mitigation measures for the loss of farmland. It is a requirement of state law. It isn't in the environmental documents. So what we are putting here is saying yes, you should consider it. That I think we all agree with, because that is the state law. But I also agree with you, we don't have to say you should consider this mitigation measure. So I think it could be a lot clearer if we just say, the first one says you have to consider, and the next one, here are some examples you may consider. Mm-hmm. It's just, here are some examples. Yeah. It's not saying you should. And I think that would clear this up, because this is our effort at LAFCO trying to make it easier to meet that requirement. Yeah. And as I look at the examples, is what I consider these, it just says, like one bullet says fee title. I don't know what that exactly means, so I think we could be a little clearer there. But I think this would all be, this whole concern that is being raised, I think it could be resolved by just saying, here are examples.
Well, I was going to suggest that maybe the handbook statement be amended to include within there, at the discretion of the lead agency, to give more flexibility back to the lead agency. In other words, for projects that would result in the conversion of prime agricultural land to non-agricultural uses, the environmental document should consider mitigation measures at the discretion of the lead agency, which brings the responsibility back to whoever it is. Mm-hmm. And that makes it clear that it's the lead agency's responsibility and not LAFCO's. That's a good suggestion.
Well, let me ask this a straw poll of one Mr. Lambert representing a city, but where what you've seen in front of you is, would you be of the thought that would give your staff enough guidance? Does it sound mandatory? Does it sound suggestive? I don't know what it, how would you interpret it? And then from Ms. Brillhart's standpoint, which you really don't do with annexations, but in giving guidance to the cities as they formulate their plans, your input on this language is being proposed.
I think I would answer that question, Chair Morehouse would. the current language makes it sound like that we should, but if we don't, it might be held against us when the LAFCO action comes. And I think that's the clarification, that it's the city's discretion, it's the lead agency's discretion. I think that's a good solution as well, so that's it. The way it's worded now, it appears that if we don't do it, the LAFCO action could actually force us to, and then we'd have an inadequate environmental document, and we would be in that cycle. So I think that's the clarification that I'm looking for, at least from the city's perspective. Although I haven't had a chance to really look at this in detail. I didn't see it till this morning. So I think both Kim and I would rather have a little bit more time. I think every word in this is really key. And just enough, even if you defer it to, I know you might cancel your October meeting, hopefully you won't, that maybe we have time to look at that and come back to you with maybe some suggested language that would work. And I'm happy to have a conversation with all the cities in LAFCO on how we work on these things together. I think that would be critical as well.
Ms. Brillhart, you can concur with that, I think.
I would agree. I would agree with Mr. Lambert, but I would also want to speak to Supervisor Zaragoza's issue that the county has the luxury of being in the same building as Kai, and so we partner a lot. He comes to a lot of our meetings early and often when we have questions, and he has come and done that presentation to all 40 of our staff, LAFCO 101, and it is very helpful because it's a confusing topic, and so he works with our counter staff to make sure that we're giving appropriate direction. And just recently, we've created a form where we developed with LAFCO in all of the cities to say if a development project is being proposed in the county, but it's in the sphere of influence or the area of interest of a city, we developed a form working together with all of the cities and LAFCO to saying you need LAFCO's signature, you need the city's signature too, so we all understand how we're going to move forward with this project.
And I think it would help us in the future, especially with the concerns we had in public comments today, What is this responsibility? Who's the lead agency? Are we supposed to do a CEQA, or do we do an amendment? Do we do whatever? And this way, at least, there's guidelines and people understand it. And we had that before in the past when I was a city council member, because we had quite a few projects going on in Oxnard, and we had a lot of concerns from our planning folks, and we met with LAFCO, and that really helped tremendously. But getting everybody involved, I think it'll help us as a commission and also the LAFCO and also the planners from cities.
Do we have any other questions of the planning directors? Ms. Rooney.
So if you were to read this list, and it says part of it is could and part of it is should, with the two different sections there, would you think that one is mandated over the other? And I have follow-up questions to that.
So for me, I wouldn't think that it was mandated, although there is a difference as somebody that has to study commas and hyphens and shoulds and coulds and musts all day long. I would wonder why they were differently, and then I would wonder if I was the applicant saying, well, you should have done it, and to what level of detail would you do it in your environmental document to be approved by the city, and then come to LAFCO and said, well, that's not what we really meant by should. We meant you needed to go through each one of them and exhaustively tell us why you tried that method and that wouldn't work. And so I think just it should be consistent, and then there should be some guidelines for what it is exactly that we need to discuss in environmental documents to meet the requirement. You already have to do it, as Supervisor Parks points out, in CEQA, and the fact that people aren't doing it and they're not. Supervisor Parks and I have talked about that before, and people have been called to task from the Department of Conservation, saying, "You're supposed to do this. Where is your ag mitigation? Where are you putting this information forth in your CEQA document?" So it should be done. So the planning departments, we should be partnering together, figuring out why it's not being done appropriately, maybe instead of putting new rules at a different level.
Okay. So if you were to be working with an applicant where you see this list of items here, although it's not limited to this, is what it says, would you think that each one of these would require a study? At what detail are you looking for? I mean, I'm just asking your opinion on it, just to see how far would the applicant have to go if this was presented the way it is?
Well, and under CEQA, a mitigation measure, it has to be foreseeable that you can actually implement it. So there has to be a level of detail if it really is a mitigation measure that you can actually accomplish it. So there would be quite a bit of level of detail when you pick one, to know that if you're picking a some other land to mitigate. Is that land available? Is it sort of similar land? You'd have to do some of that basic analysis. Otherwise, you have a mitigation measure that you don't know you can accomplish. So I think it would require quite a bit of upfront analysis, which that's what CEQA requires anyway.
So, I mean, if CEQA already requires it, then do you think this is just another layer? Is it duplicative?
I think it is. I think if it's just a suggestion that cities, as they implement their CEQA documents, these are things they should consider as options. That language is sort of framed that way. I think that's okay because we should be doing that anyway. My worry, and I said this earlier, is if it's a should and then we don't quite do it right, will it count against us when we actually come to this body? So I think that's the distinction that would be helpful. That sort of preamble that somebody mentioned, that some introductory comments about how these would be used by jurisdictions, I think would be really helpful.
Okay. So if this was at the discretion of the lead agency could then make a finding of overriding consideration if the mitigations were not feasible?
Right, they can always do that.
Yeah, we can do that now, yes. But I think at the discretion of the lead agency that you suggested earlier, Commissioner Freeman, was helpful. Something like that would be useful.
Chair Morehouse, you know, I heard earlier comments that we're trying to make it easier for applicants. This doesn't feel easier to me. And so listening to the professionals that are standing before us and the experts that deal with this every day, they're requesting additional time to review everything. So, I mean, if the body would entertain it, I think that we should offer that time for the experts to review this and come back with some suggestions and comments.
Right. Are there any other questions of our professionals? If we'll move to our deliberations up here, Ms. Parks.
You know what I would like to see? Obviously, there's a desire to bring this forward to the planning directors meeting and to the cities. But I think I would rather have it changed when we do bring it forward. And I like the suggestion from Commissioner Freeman. And so if I could, I guess Kai has something to say, but I would like to make a motion that incorporates a better wording, and that would be using her wording, should consider at the discretion these following examples, and then take out what we have previously before that. So.
Okay, if you'll hold that motion for a second, just in terms of the general conversation, it does seem like one of the quandaries we're having is to strengthen the advisory purpose of this. I'm going to go back for a quick moment to the CEQA issue as raised by Mr. Lambert. Much of our CEQA today has unfortunately been formulated by the courts. It wasn't from the legislative action that's occurred. And so we're living with a court-shaped environmental process today. But the feasibility of mitigations is still very strong. So you can bring forward mitigations, but the courts will still hold that they have to be feasible. You can create all kinds of preposterous things and say, well, you know, the technology isn't here yet or whatever else. So there has to be that reasonableness. With regards to where Commissioner Parks is headed with this in terms of bringing it to the planning directors, I think that is very important. With respect to Mr. Zaragoza's comments, perhaps the LAFCo 101 time is to that planning directors group. We've had some changes throughout the county in terms of who sits in those seats now. And so it'd be worthwhile it's always worthwhile to do a refresher and not assume that everybody's on the same page or has the same level of awareness. But I too believe that since I don't see a sense of urgency on this, I know it's protracted. I know it's frustrating. We seem like we've gone on and on. But as my daddy told me, if you don't have time to do it right the first time, when you're going to have a chance to go back and do it again. And I don't see that we need to do this in haste just because we want to do Pontius Pilate and wash our hands of it and move on. I think we have to do what's appropriate to get us through what's been a rather agonizing analysis for us. We are mandated one capacity to look at certain things. On the other hand, there's been some disagreement on this body and elsewhere as to whether or not the things that are brought forward to us in our considerations are adequate, and we were trying to give some guidance from this. So to that end, Ms. Parks, if you're thinking that Ms. Freeman's suggestion that we put some other language on there If that will help us in guiding to strengthen our advisory purpose, then that would be adequate. But I would strongly urge us that we do not take any action until today I would suggest we don't take an action and get it in front of the planning directors group.
What I would like to, I'm sorry, Kai, did you have something you want to say?
No, I'll respond.
Okay, what I would like to make as my motion is to take the sentence that's currently there that says mitigation measures that could be considered in the environment document include but are not necessarily limited to, that we change that to be examples of mitigation measures that could be considered at the discretion of the agency include.
Are you going to put all of them on there and take out the second
Right, and
dividing
take
part?
out the, correct. So
Take
these are all examples. And then also clarify what fee title. I think you need a few more words in there. And then let that one be the one that goes out to the planning directors and the cities for their comments. So that would be a two-part motion. One is to use that wording, and secondly would be to share it with for comment with the city planning director meeting.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second.
Yeah, examples of mitigation measures that could be considered at the discretion of the agency or whoever the applicant are, and it would just list them, and it wouldn't have that second sentence in the middle of them either. It's just giving a list of examples.
And clarify the wording to fee title. And then also that it would go forward to the planning directors group. All right. Ms. Rooney?
And we talked about that this is not mandatory. So, I mean, I'd like to see that we strengthen that language, that it may be encouraged but not mandatory.
That's where it comes to at the discretion of the applicant.
Is it of the applicant or the agency? Or
It'd be the lead agency
Okay,
primarily.
lead agency.
Okay, so as a layperson, that's not clear to me. So I still would like to strengthen it to say it's not mandatory.
Well, Ms. Rooney, I would suggest at this point that I will accept what Commissioner Parks is suggesting, but I think by bringing it forward to the planning directors group that if that's not clear enough to them, they will bring it back to us and tell, you're still not doing a good job. I think that will probably emerge if they don't understand it and they have to administer it, then we're in trouble. Okay? So, this is Mr. Loma.
Yeah, just a clarification question. Is the commission direction to eliminate this section of the wording or maintain that?
No, there was no intention to eliminate any of the suggestions. It was to eliminate the break in them with the paragraph between, and then all the bullet points would be listed under one opening paragraph that would clarify, and you would strengthen the discussion of what fee title means.
And that would be examples of mitigation measures that could be considered at the discretion of the lead agency are.
Okay.
You just take out, you may have one list and take it out. If I could, at our last meeting when we discussed this, there was also consideration of listing links to other places around the state. And so I didn't see that coming back anywhere here, where it's like, here's some other resources that you could look at should you desire. So I don't know what happened to that and the links, if that is going to be provided on here, so just posing the question.
You mean, I want to make sure I understand. So you're suggesting that we had many testifiers, I think, at our first public workshop from other jurisdictions as how they approach that. Are you suggesting that those could be referenced?
At the last meeting, April, when we did this direction, at the last meeting, when we talked about how this is going to be formulated, as part of this list, it was also going to provide resources for other people to look at what other places around the state have done. So that was just one of the directions to add the links there.
I would rather that be a separate motion, or we could do that when it comes back from the planning directors. But for this motion on the table here, we're just trying to get wording for what we want to put in the handbook, right?
Right. As I understand what we all agreed on at the last meeting, that was part of it. So I'm just bringing it up that it's not here, and it was part of our last discussion. So I think that if we're going to be complete in our decision, we either have it or we don't. So as it's being revised, that we
That
go
was to
back
do-
and do it.
That was like on the website, we could have links and stuff, but
Yeah,
I
I
think
th-
what we're looking here at for
That's-
the.
I
Where
believe
this
that
was
was the
supposed to go
intent,
to.
was to find further guidance and to show examples, yes, above and beyond just listing them by bullet points. Clearly, we would want to do all we can to make any applicant or any lead agency understand the kinds of things that they might look at. So with that, Mr. Ross.
One other thing, I know at the ag mitigation workshops, we were provided with some case studies of what other LAFCo commissions have done in the past. Have we collaborated with any other LAFCOs? Surely we're not the only ones that have this kind of language in the commissioners' handbooks. Did we consult anybody else as we put this language together? I don't recall.
No, to my knowledge, there are no other LAFCOs that have just kind of directive language that's outside their policies. I think we will be the only one. There's just a handful that have mitigation policies to begin with, but I've not come across something like this.
Okay, so we're kind of paving the way on this.
That's correct.
Yeah, we did have some input at our workshops from other LAFCOs as to how they approach it, but yes, ours is kind of unique given our sensitivity to our agricultural land in this county. Ms. Freeman?
I'm going to complicate things.
Uh-oh. Okay, I thought we were getting out from under
I
this.
wonder if we could amend the motion to say where, right after where it says the lead agency and if feasible, so that they look at what is feasible. Let's clarify in the language that the lead agency has the discretion if feasible.
I accept the amendment to the motion. Good
Okay,
suggestion.
I have a friendly amendment. The motion maker has accepted that friendly amendment. Who was the seconder?
I was.
I'll get to that.
I was the second. I
Second,
accept
okay.
that.
Okay. So at this point, before we take a vote, Rochelle, have you been able to record adequately? And can you respond to us as to what the actual motion is in front of us? So, okay.
I've written down, I can give it a shot.
Okay.
Okay.
Mr. Wilma, if you please read back to us what the motion is.
Okay, so in the third paragraph, let's see. This paragraph here. It would be revised to say examples of mitigation measures that could be considered at the discretion of the lead agency if feasible are, then that would have that list and clarify what fee title means. It means ownership, by the way. Get rid of this section and continue with those bullet points.
Right. And part of the motion is to take it directly to the planning director's group.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. We all clear on what the motion is?
The
Ms.
motion
Rooney.
is to make those changes,
Yes.
but not implement until after the planning, after feedback from the experts with planning.
Correct.
Okay?
You all understand? Okay, with that, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions?
And if I may speak to the LAFCO 101, at the Cal-LAFCO conference in October, they are having a LAFCO 101 session, and I did invite all of the city managers and managers of all of the special districts to encourage their staff and anyone related to LAFCO business and their elected officials to attend it. It's $40 to attend. I think it's a 2-hour session, and it is designed for those individuals that are going to be dealing with LAFCO.
And it's going to be held in Santa Barbara.
In Santa Barbara on Wednesday morning of the conference.
Excellent class.
Yes, thank you for doing that, Kai, but sometimes, you can't bring the mountain to Muhammad, so you have to turn around and do it the other way. So if you don't get all the people there, you may have to come down and do it to them.
Kai, one of the things that was mentioned by our commissioner is that we could probably send a letter to the cities and invite them to the LAFCO conference and also.
Right, that's what I did. Yeah,
Oh,
they were,
good.
all the city managers were, it was to encourage them to invite any relevant staff and elected officials that would benefit from the LAFCO 101.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, that concludes that item. Let me do this. I'm keeping an eye on the clock because Mr. Dandy has shared with me you have to depart at 11:30, correct? It is imperative, I believe, to have him engaged in a couple of our conversations, specifically with regards to items 19, 20, and 21. I also think that the rest of our agenda is very important as well, but I got to figure out how to do this so that we don't lose Mr. Dandy's involvement in this. So with the indulgence of the commission, let me jump quickly to item number 19, which is the attendance of alternate commissioners at a closed session, and determine whether the alternate commissioners have an essential role to play as defined by state law and guiding law to us in this closed session on item 21. For that, I think I'll turn to Mr. Walker for clarification on the item.
With respect to item 19?
Correct.
Yes, I had previously informed the commission in years past that pursuant to case law, alternate commissioners can appear in closed sessions only under limited circumstances. And the case law develops this standard here, that if your commission or the sitting commission or sitting board determines the alternate commissioners or board members would have an official or essential role to play, then your commission can allow them to attend. And what has happened over the last few years is the commission has made that decision impliedly by inviting the alternate commissioners to sit in on closed sessions addressing the executive officer's performance. And looking back at it, both Mr. Lowell and I, concurred that it would be better for that to be an express decision by your commission, not an implied decision. So that's why we put it on the agenda, so you can expressly make that determination one way or the other to allow the alternate commissioners to attend the closed session.
Okay. So jumping to item 19, and thank you for that clarification, Mr. Walker. It is imperative on those of us who are regular members to decide whether or not we're going to include our alternates in our discussions with regards to items 20 and 21. Mr. Cunningham.
Well, I brought this up years ago, and I think it's very important that the alternate public member be allowed, or any of the other alternates, because you are in there and you can understand what's going on. I know the first time I was here as an alternate member, I sat out here and waited for people to come back, and I had no idea what they had discussed or talked about. So I just feel it's important that they be allowed to be in the meetings and can see what's happening in front of the commission.
Okay. Other commissioners' thoughts? Commissioner Ramirez.
I just wondered, are we talking about every closed session or just specific ones?
It's just specific to this one.
It's just specific to this closed session. The determination would have to be made each time a closed session comes up.
Yeah. Thank you.
In light of the fact that we are also looking on item 14 with the status of our public member and alternate public member seats, I would put forth that I do believe our alternates have a very essential role to play. I think that many of the ones that currently here, including Ms. Ramirez, who's sitting up with us now, have sat through this thing enough to observe, to be viable contributors to our discussions. And so I would say that they do play an essential role. If there's any contradictory viewpoints, Mr. Ross, since you're an alternate.
Yeah, not contradictory at all, but just mentioning that we as alternate commissioners do receive kind of a packet for reviewing the performance of the executive. And so in that light, I think it would be appropriate for us to continue that conversation behind closed doors.
I would concur. Further discussion, Mr. Dandy?
Considering that there's probably 3 changes to this current makeup of the commission, and both of these alternates would be stepping up to fill, most likely stepping up to fill those, it would be appropriate to have them in this closed session.
I would concur. Okay, so I guess we need to go through the formal process. So I would entertain a motion to include our alternates in our discussions in closed session. Motion? Have a second. Okay. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? All right. So we'll be including our alternates in our discussions. Then with that, again, under fear of losing Mr. Dandy, let us jump to item 21. Let me do one quick thing, though. I know that we have several members in the audience. I don't know whether they're hovering because of other items we still have on here. And in fairness to them, because this may take a little while, was there something else that I don't have any speaker cards, anybody was particularly waiting for in any other items on the agenda? Ms. Ramirez.
I note that Mr. Valenzuela is in the audience. Would you raise your hand? Mr. Valenzuela, who has applied to be a public member, an alternate public member. I just want to
Okay.
note his presence.
Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you, AJ, for stepping up to that. But in terms of, I'm very concerned about our timing on this. So I think we should forego 14. I'm sorry, AJ, to put you in an awkward position, but I think it's important that we go into our closed session. Item number 21 is to do that. So as long as I'm not in error in procedure, Mr. Walker, are we okay with that?
We are okay with that. I believe someone will need to contact Mr. Dembowski to make sure he knows he needs to come down for that.
He should be watching, I believe.
Okay.
Okay, very good. So that, with that, then we will retreat to closed session. And I cannot give you a time certain as when we will come out of it. And with that, then we will pick up the rest of our agenda. Mr. Loma, before we go into closed session?
Nothing.
Very good. All right. Let's retreat.
The current alternate public member.
Well, you're jumping to 14. We still have 20. So is there concurrence we can move to 20 right now, which is the compensation issue? Okay, with that concurrence, then we shall take up item 20, which is compensation of the executive officer. Consideration of granting a merit increase for the LAFCO executive officer. And we already have the materials. And Kai, I don't think you have anything. You're just standing there. Thank you. Okay, with that, the indulgence of the committee, I will let anybody offer whatever they wish.
I'd like to make a motion that we give Kai 7%.
I'll second that.
Okay, I have a motion and a second to give him 7. Do I have any other considerations to that? Alternatives? Okay. Seeing no other comments, then we have a motion and a second to give him a 7% increase. I suppose we ought to take a roll call because this is a financial issue.
Yes.
Out of consideration for my agency and the raises that we were able or can give, I think 7% is high, and it's no reflection on Kai. It's just above what it would be the norm of a mean raise.
So you're voting no?
I'm voting no.
I also would like to see something lower, like 5%, and would consider that
So you're voting no?
at this point in time. I'm not
Unless
supporting
there's an alternative motion.
There is?
No, I said unless there is. If you'd
Right.
like to make an alternative motion.
I'll
you
do
can.
an alternative motion at 5%.
Second.
Okay, have a
We're in
motion.
the middle of a vote on the other, so
Yeah, yeah.
procedurally, you can do that?
I think we probably ought to conclude this vote, and then we'll come back with the second motion. Okay.
Generally, alternative motion takes the place of the main motion.
Yeah, but we were in the middle of the vote for the motion, so that
I
makes it
don't know.
particularly
Oh, I
awkward.
see.
Yeah, well.
Do you want me to, I'd
with-
be happy to withdraw
withdraw.
and do it in a separate motion?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Okay, let's complete the vote on the first motion. We're still at the 7%.
And
We've
I'll say-
had two,
I'll say no.
we've had 2 noes and one yes.
I say yes.
Commissioner Morehouse.
I too am of the camp that in this day and age, still a sensitivity to public salaries, as much as I'd like to, and I think we've got a good executive officer. I think I have to stick to the 5% category, so I'll say no.
Commissioner Ramirez.
Yes.
Commissioner Rooney.
No.
So the 7.5% fails on a 4-3 vote. With that, then I will entertain an alternative motion.
I'll move 5%.
Second?
Okay, having a motion and a second for 5%. Again, let's take a roll call.
Commissioner Cunningham.
Maybe I'll make an offer motion. No, I'm just kidding. Yes.
Commissioner Freeman.
Yes.
Commissioner Parks.
Yes.
Commissioner Zaragoza.
Yes.
Commissioner Morehouse.
Yes.
Commissioner Ramirez.
Yes.
Commissioner Rooney.
Yes.
Okay, that passes unanimously. Kai, well done, and we appreciate your work. Okay, with that, then we'll move to item 14, which is the appointment of public member and alternate public member seats. And this is to consider the following options for the public member and alternate public member for the 4-year terms beginning on January 1st, 2017. You can quickly walk us through this, but we're under, again, time constraint. Kai.
Yes, sure. Very briefly, the terms of office for both the public member, Mr. Cunningham, and alternate public member David Ross are going to be expiring on January of this year. So the commission does need to make appointments to those subsequent terms, 4-year terms beginning January 2017. There are 3 options outlined in the staff report. One would be to appoint alternate Commissioner Ross, who has indicated that he would be amenable to that. To the public member
I think our options are pretty clear to us, and as you are all cognizant, I have announced that I'm not running again for my city council, so that means I'll be surrendering a seat. There will be some interesting recompositions going on up here. I think there's some value in having an alternate step up who has been consistent through this. Mr. Ross, you think you'd be able to fulfill your term as a permanent member?
I would be happy to. I've been with this organization for over a year now. Went to the LAFCo conference in Sacramento, multiple ag mitigation workshops. I feel like my understanding of the issues in context in this county are on par with what's to be expected on the dais, and I'd be happy to have the opportunity to sit up there.
Well, my inclination would be to go to option one, but let me hear from the commissioners. Commissioner Cunningham?
I would support option one. I'd make that motion. I think we've done a great replacement. I think he's doing really good, and I'm glad that I can leave with someone that can take him place.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion out of Cunningham, second out of Ramirez for option one. Is there any further discussion on the
Does that
option?
take A and B? That's A and B, right?
Yes, it would be to appoint the public member currently
And
to
then-
full-time and then direct staff to
That's right,
recruit for
okay.
an alternate. And we did have somebody in the audience who was interested
AJ.
in that alternate, yes. Okay. With that, we don't need a roll call, so all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? With that, very good. And Mr. Ross, hopefully we'll see you up here soon.
And
Thank you very
Chair,
much.
I'm sorry, may I quickly add, one of the recommendations would be for the commission to appoint a committee to help select that alternate member. We would expect one county representative, one city representative, and one special district representative on that committee.
Correct, okay. So are there any volunteers?
Can it be an alternate city member?
I think we probably have to have full
regular.
members,
Yes,
members,
it's-
unfortunately.
Linda.
Okay, Parks for the county, special district. Elaine, you want to step up?
I'll try it.
Okay, two, and then city leaves me or Janice, and I should step back and we first, I'll take a step forward.
Well,
We'll
that should
step
be
back.
done before, right? Before the,
Yeah, no, I will be happy to partake in that, so I'll just work it into my schedule. So
Okay.
the committee will consist of the three of us. Very good. All right, with that then, we'll move on to,
18?
you have to depart. I think we will, 2, 3, 4, 5 out of 7 is still a quorum
Still a quorum.
technically.
Yep.
Yes, okay. So, item 15 was an update on the formation of the Kiama Water Basin District. I think your staff report was very thorough. I don't know, does anybody really need this? This is simply a receive and file. We understand what's going on. We're a very small player in the big picture, but it's something that the state's sort of driven and mandated, correct?
Right.
Yeah.
So,
So you need a motion?
a motion, receive and
So-
file?
There's a motion to receive and file.
Second. Okay, second out of Freeman, all right. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? All right, so now we're to item number 16, which is the LAFCo Board of Directors nominations, authorizing the chair to submit nominations for the 2016-17 LAFCo Board of Directors for the county member and district member seats as approved by the commission. Again, it was in our staff reports, and as you recall, many years ago, LAFCO split into districts as demonstrated in our attachments. They have a map showing those districts. We have a need in our coastal section. I think, Kai, if you refresh my memory, we've had representatives from the coastal section from Santa Barbara and further north to Monterey, but nobody quite as far south as us.
That's correct, yes.
And if there's a desire for any of us to get that seat, or at least have our names put forward, then we need to take action on that right now.
That would be either for a county member or a district member.
Correct.
I'd like to ask Commissioner Freeman if she's interested.
I've given it some thought. How much time are there monthly meetings?
Yeah, Commissioner Cunningham served on the board a few years ago, and it's, I think, about 10 a year, if I
10 a
recall
year?
correctly. Right.
Spread all through the
Spread,
state?
yeah, typically it's between north and south, and then there's some special meetings related to the LAFCo conference organization, that kind of thing. And then, of course, it all depends on what type of committees you'd like to sit on, if any, as part
Committee
of that.
meetings and,
Right.
I'll consider you.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
There's a process for advancing your name, and of course, that doesn't mean you're gonna get it either, but.
Is there a
if you're-
campaign put on?
Oh, if you go to Cal
Oh,
LAFCO
yeah.
conferences, yes, there are.
Yeah, typically it
And
consists
who
of
can
candidates.
guide you in those campaigns? Yes.
So, yeah, we will need a vote of the commission for that nomination. to
Okay,
put that
so,
forward.
do
I
you have
move, also move.
motion by Ramirez, second by Zaragoza to advance Commissioner Freeman's name for that seat.
Thank you.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Good luck with that, Elaine. Thank you.
Thank you.
Carry the
I need a
flag
campaign.
flag forward. Yes, it's. But it would be nice to have some representation. Sometimes the northern counties tend to dominate that discussion and forget about us in the south. So good. Okay, and then for 17 is the Cal LAFCO 2016-17 Board of Directors election. The voting delegates, we will be having the annual conference, and so I guess we need to select a voting delegate there and an alternate for the Board of Directors election. So
You're going?
I'm not going.
You're not going.
I'm going, but I'm an alternate, so
I'm gonna,
You're going?
mhm.
Okay.
are you going then?
So we have both Mr. Zaragoza and Mr. Cunningham going as full
We have Lou, go ahead.
reps.
And I'm going too.
Oh, okay.
Oh, you are going.
Everybody's going.
Okay, well,
So
I'm the
who
one
wants
who's
to
not
go?
going, and there's a reason for that. I'm not going to be around, so. But anyway, with that, then, I'll take a nomination for our voting delegate, and then a nomination for an alternate.
I'll nominate Lou.
Nominate Lou for the voting delegate.
Second.
Have a second out of Ramirez. Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Okay, hearing none, Lou, you shall be our voting delegate. And then an alternate. We'll need an alternate. Anybody
I'll
want to serve?
nominate,
Okay.
Mr. Zaragoza for alternate, okay. Second?
second.
Have a second. Okay, nomination out of Freeman's. Was Freeman's, second was out of Ramirez. For Mr. Zaragoza, that would be our alternate at the Board of Directors. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Well, we dispense with those quickly, good. The next item on here was cancellation of October 10th meeting for the regular meeting, or the 19th meeting, I'm sorry. Nice, I put on my glasses at 9, looked like a 0. Is there, Kai, in light of what transpired earlier during public comments, is there a chance that October meeting would be required or necessary or available?
It would be the only item on the agenda at this point. If we were to bring an update on North Bank, given the short time frame, I don't know that I would have much of an evaluation. I certainly would not have a recommendation for any type of action at that point. So I would just as soon wait until November, where we've had more time to get, to review the project and give you more.
Okay, so you really don't see anything else, and it really wouldn't be a good use of our time or staff's time if we don't have anything else for the 19th.
Right.
That being the case, then, I will entertain a motion for the cancellation of the October 19th meeting.
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion by Ramirez, second by Freeman. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Okay, we will not be meeting in October. And I think we took care of 19, 20, and 21 already. So with that, Mr. Wilma, if you'd like to give us your executive officer's report.
How about nothing?
You got nothing? That's cool, too. All right. The Cal LAFCO conference update, you'd like to brief us on that real quickly?
Right, yes. All of the registrations are in. Hotels are reserved. It's going to be the second to last week of October. I believe I've provided you all the materials, regarding that and regarding the workshop prior to. So I am organizing one of the sessions regarding responsible agencies, how LAFCO is a responsible agency. And the interesting about that session is that it's going to look at how 3 different LAFCOs have handled environmental documents that they believe are inadequate for their use. And Michael Walker is going to be one of the panelists on that session.
Okay.
And other than that, the next LAFCO meeting is now November 16th.
All right, and you provided us with informational items. We will turn then to commissioners' comments. Additional comments from the commission? I will just share with all of you 2 things you may have received in one of your capacities. There is the annual Countywide, it used to be group, where still is home, is having a housing conference on October 4th. It's at the County Education Office. Always interesting. I think you're going to find a lot of discussion about demand for housing. And then I will underscore, SCAG is also doing one. I'm not sure. We've got to get better coordination on this. Carmen knows my drumbeat on this, but the fact is that SCAG will be also having a major housing conference on October 11th. It's down in Los Angeles. It's not just really SCAG sponsored. It is to underscore the housing crisis we have in the state. We have two major crises: water, housing. How we're going to reconcile those, I'm not sure, but the attendees at this conference at SCAG will include members from ABAG, that's the association up in the Bay Area, SACOG, which is the Sacramento COG, SANDAG, which is San Diego COG, because they're all major areas that we're having housing crisis. And as we had our discussion this evening, or earlier today, about the annexations, the role of cities, our guidelines for our development, where does our housing go, what our housing needs going to be, how do we convert land use, etc. You may want to engage in that. I would lead you to the SCAG website, scag.ca.gov, and you will find a big flyer there on the housing conference. I was participating the other day in a committee meeting to that. I think that they have capacity for 400, and I think they still have some reservations open. It will take place from, I believe, 8 in the morning on Tuesday, October 11th, till about 2. There will be a lot of economists and a lot of forecasters, and we don't know what millennials are going to do. We don't know what us old codgers are going to do as retirees and baby boomers, and whether we're moving out of state. We're losing a lot of jobs in this state because we can't supply the housing, because housing is very expensive. So I think it'd be worth everybody's while to attend if you have the time and inclination. With that, seeing no other business, I thank you all very much, and we are adjourned.